In this demo, we're going to use the VMRole authoring tool to create a Windows-based resource extension, which will allow us to install and configure the blogengine.net blog application. Now, the demo does presuppose that you're already familiar with concepts like resource definitions, view definitions, and resource extensions, so we won't drill too deeply into the details of those items, but we will take this opportunity to show you how easy it is to create a Windows-based resource extension using the VMRole authoring tool. Now, before we go into the tool itself, I have some payload that's going to be required to deploy BlogEngine. Number one, I've downloaded a BlogEngine web deploy package from Codeplex from this page here. Second, I have a CMD file to configure the firewall on port 80. And finally, I have the web deploy framework along with a CMD file to go ahead and install web deploy, since that will be required in order to install and configure the BlogEngine web deploy package. So to get started, I'll switch over to the authoring tool and I'll choose File, New Windows Resource Extension Package. Now I have to give the package a name, and I'm going to call it BlogEngine Demo, along with a folder into which the tool will output any artifacts that are created as a result of the authoring process. The tool goes ahead and gives me a default resource extension with the name I specified and a default version. I'll go ahead and change the publisher, and we'll move on to resource requirements. Resource requirements allow you to specify one or more virtual hard disk tags which must be present on the VHD or VHDX, which will be used to deploy the gallery item. Since I've created a Windows resource extension, the tool's gone ahead and populated a default tag of Windows. I'd like to use a different tag, however, because I'm going to package this item for use with Windows Server 2012. Now, if a tag that I wanted to use wasn't present in the drop-down list, I could go ahead and freeform type it and click the plus sign. I could also add more than one tag required as part of deployment of the gallery item, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave Windows Server 2012. And I'm going to move on to the Application Profile section. The Application Profile section allows me to add different types of artifacts such as web deploy, SQL DAC packages, script applications, or script commands. In addition, I could add things like a SQL profile and one or more SQL deployments, along with SQL scripts. I'm going to first start by configuring the roles and features that are required for this particular gallery item. You'll see that first I have to select the compatible OS, and that's because Windows Server roles and features change between versions of Windows. I'm going to package this for Windows Server 2012, so I select Windows Server 2012 in the compatible OS screen, and that changes the roles and features that I have available to me. I want to install the .NET Framework 3.5.1 along with a number of other roles and features, such as Web Server, and I don't need all of these underlying features of the Web Server, so I'll go ahead and deselect ones so that I have only the roles and features that I actually require for this particular gallery item. If I scroll down further, I can go ahead and select particular features that I need. I'm going to go ahead and install the .NET Framework 3.5, ASP.NET 4.5, and the .NET Framework 4.5, along with the other roles and features that I selected above. Now that I have the roles and features required for my gallery item, I can go ahead and select Application Profile again and add a web application. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to assume that I don't have the rights to redistribute either the web deploy package, which is located here, or the web deploy framework, which is located here. Because the configure firewall script is a custom script of mine, I do have rights to redistribute that. And the reason I bring this up is that when I'm browsing for application payload, such as what I have to do here for the web application BlogEngine, I can go ahead and mark that package as external. What that means is the end user is going to go ahead and have to download that particular piece of payload and put it in a location relative to the resource extension when the import is done to Virtual Machine Manager. So if I browse to my web deploy package, before I click Update, I'm going to mark this package as external. Now if I switch to my data package location here, you'll see that we've not only added the BlogEngine web deploy package, but we've also generated a hash so that we can be sure when the user goes to import this that the file they've downloaded is the actual file that we require. The other thing I can do is I can give a URL hint to the end user in order to tell them where they can go ahead and download this particular web deploy application. Now, because I know that the URL to download this is right over here, I'm going to go ahead and add that as a URL hint. And I'm going to switch back to my web application. I know that my web deploy package has two parameters, and I'm going to insert them here. And the first parameter is called application path. And it has a value of default website / blog engine. Now, if I want to give the end user some control over how to create this particular web application, I can leave default website, and I can allow the end user to give me a value for the application they want to create underneath the default website. And I do that by using our standard parameter syntax, which is open bracket, param dot, an internal name, I'm going to call it web application, and a closing bracket. The second parameter in my web deploy package is called setACL_parameter1. And this is used to set permissions on a particular data directory. Now again, the default value that I can use for this parameter is default website / blog engine / app data. But because I know that this app data directory is going to live underneath the web application that's created, I'm going to use the same parameter here so that the end user will give me the value one time, and I'll use it in multiple locations when deploying this particular package. Now I know that my parameters are set, and I also know that before the web deploy package can be installed, I need to install the web deploy framework. So I'm going to add a script command to this web application, and I'm going to fill out some basic properties. First, I'm going to browse to the payload for this application, and as I showed you earlier, it was this web deploy folder that has inside of it the web deploy installation MSI as well as a CMD file. Now, these particular artifacts can be found on any virtual machine manager installation. So I'm going to include both of them, and again, because I don't have the rights to redistribute these within my gallery item, I'll mark them as external and click Update. And if I go back to the data package, you can see that we've generated 2 new files along with 2 new hashes, because those are the 2 files that were present in that folder. Back to the script command, I can set basic properties such as whether the VM should always reboot after the script is executed. I have to specify a deployment order, along with an error policy should the script fail. I'm going to say to fail the deployment if the script fails. I have to provide an executable, which in this case is cmd.exe, along with parameters. And I'm going to call the CMD file that was present in my web deploy folder. I could specify regexes to match exit codes, the max output size, and so forth, but I'm just going to go ahead and set the required properties, such as restart on retry, which is if the script fails and the user retries the job, should we try to rerun the script? I'll say that's true in this case. The script type, because I need web deploy installed before I can configure my package, I'll mark this as a pre-install script so that it will execute before this web application. I have to give a script credential. Now I can leave this blank, in which case the script will execute under the built-in system account, but I'm going to go ahead and generate a parameter for this, and I'm going to call this my install web deploy script credential. I can give standard error paths to write any standard error into the virtual machine when the script runs, as well as any standard output. I'll take the defaults that the tool generates, and finally a timeout. I know that this takes just a couple minutes to install, but to be safe, I'll give a 600-second timeout. Now that I have my pre-install script configured to install the web deploy framework, as well as my web deploy application, I'm going to add one more script. So I choose application profile, and I'll choose provisioning script. And this script is going to be used to go ahead and configure the firewall on the machine so that port 80 is open. Now this is my custom script, and I have rights to redistribute that. So I will choose the folder in which that CMD file is present. I will not mark this as external. I'll simply click Update. What this means is the contents of this folder are going to be packaged with my resource extension package. Again, I don't need to reboot after this. My deployment order is going to be 1. My error policy here will be to also fail on match. My executable in this case is cmd.exe. And the command file that I have, which is configure firewall cmd, takes 2 parameters. One, the name of the rule that I want to create, along with the TCP port that I want opened. So I'll specify web and port 80. I can also choose again to restart on retry. The script type, in this case, after my web deploy package has been installed, I'll go ahead and say that this script should execute, although in reality it could execute at any time. And again, a script credential, and I'll generate a new parameter for this, which says configure firewall script credential. I'll set other common properties like the standard error path, the standard output path, but here I'll give them different names, so if I have to troubleshoot this, I know exactly which files to look at. So I'll call this firewall error.txt and firewall out.txt. Finally, another timeout. I'm going to give this 120 seconds. And now I have all of the application artifacts that I need to get Blog Engine installed and to get my firewall configured. At this point, I can click the Validate button in the tool, and I see that I have 0 errors and 0 warnings. So I'll go ahead and save the package. Now that the package has been saved, the next step in the process is going to be to bind this resource extension to a resource definition. Now I'm not going to go ahead and create a resource definition through the tool, although I could by simply clicking File, New Resource Definition Package. Rather, I have one pre-created from a previous demo, and we're going to go ahead and use that one. So to use that resource definition, I can simply browse to the folder that contains my resource definition package, and I can just drag it into the tool's left bar. And you see that it's loaded up the resource definition. It has a name of blog demo, a version, as well as a publisher. I'll go ahead and change the publisher for demo purposes. And now I can look at the extension references section. And before I do that, I want to look at the parameters that have been captured for my resource extension. There's the web application parameter of type string, an install web deploy script credential, and a configure firewall script credential. So back to my resource definition, on the extension references page, because I have this resource extension loaded in the tool goes ahead and it gives me the option to auto-populate the properties of that resource extension and bind to this resource definition. So I'll choose that, and it's brought in the resource extension reference along with the publisher and the version. And it's also said that I have 3 parameters that are configurable within that resource extension. Now instead of prompting the end user for these script credentials, what I'm going to do is take advantage of the fact that my resource definition in its parameters is going to ask the user for an initial administrator credential on the Windows device. So in here, in my resource extension references page, in the extension parameters section, I can say that instead of prompting the end user for a particular value, I want to use the existing value from the VM role admin credential parameter to install web deploy. And I can do the same thing for my firewall script credential. Now when I go back and look at my parameters section of my resource definition, you'll see that we only have one additional parameter which needs to be collected at deployment time, and that's the Blog Engine Demo web application parameter, where the end user can tell us which virtual directory they want to create to install Blog Engine. Moving to the scale-out page, I'm going to leave this as default. Same thing with hardware profile and the storage profile. In my operating system profile, I just take the properties that have already been set as part of creating this resource definition, and the next thing we'll do is look at the view definition. Now this definition section is specific to the resource definition itself, and will collect basic virtual machine properties like the size of the machine, the virtual hard disk image, the admin credential, and so forth. One thing I do want to point out, however, is that because my resource extension specified a tag of Windows Server 2012, the tool's gone ahead and automatically added that to the image tag section of the virtual hard disk parameter. The application settings section will contain any parameters that were defined in my resource extension. And because I removed the need to prompt the user for an install web deploy and a configure firewall credential, there's only one parameter here that needs to be specified, and that's the web application name parameter. I can give the user a sensible default of Blog Engine, but I can also mark this as configurable so that the end user could decide to give me a different value in this case should they choose to do so. I mark the parameter as required, and I could specify min and max length and even regex expressions to go ahead and validate the value that the user's given me. I'm going to leave all the other defaults. I'm going to click Validate in the tool, and I see again that I have 0 errors and 0 warnings. At this point, I'll go ahead and save all currently open items and remove them from the tool. And the tool gives me one final chance to go ahead and save those packages. Now that we have our resource extension and it's bound to an existing resource definition, the next step in the process is going to be to import this resource extension to Virtual Machine Manager. And before I do that, I should point out one additional thing. In the resource extension package, you'll notice that our data package has a location of src. What this means is, when I go to import the resource extension in Virtual Machine Manager, I'm going to have to make sure there's a directory in the location in which I'm importing the regex from that's called src, and underneath that, my web deploy package, along with my web deploy folder, which contains these two files, web deploy cmd and web deploy msi. So I'll go ahead and copy all those things over to my Virtual Machine Manager server, and we'll go ahead and get the import going. So here I am on my Virtual Machine Manager server, and you see that in the c:\vmrole demo directory, I've created a directory called src, and underneath that I've copied my web deploy package and my web deploy folder, which has the web deploy MSI and the install web deploy CMD. So in Virtual Machine Manager, I can go ahead and import this resource extension. The command that I use is import cloud resource extension. I have to give it a path to the resource extension, as well as a library share into which I want to import this resource extension. I've already configured a reference to a library share in the variable $ls, and because my library server allows unencrypted transfer, I'll use that parameter option as well to make things go a little bit faster. Now what's happening is the VMM server is validating not only the regex package, but also the fact that I have external payload that's required as specified inside the regex package, and only that payload, not anything extraneous. So again, I copied all those things into the src folder because that was the folder specified as my data package within the VMRole authoring tool. So we've imported the configure firewall folder, which again was packaged up as part of the resource extension package, and now we're importing the external payload. So the resource extension has been imported and everything looks good. The next step of the process will be to import the resource definition into the Windows Azure Pack gallery. So I'm logged into the Windows Azure Pack portal as a service administrator, and on the VM Clouds tab, I see that I have a number of choices up top like Clouds, Virtual Machines, Networks, Automation, and Gallery. I'm going to navigate to the gallery, and I'm going to choose to import my blog resource definition by clicking the Import button at the bottom, browsing to the location of that resource definition, selecting it, and clicking the checkbox. You see that it's imported relatively quickly, and I can click the arrow next to Blog Demo to go ahead and not only make it public by clicking the Make Public button at the bottom of the screen, but also switching to the Plans page and adding this to one or more plans. Now I've pre-created a demo plan for this video, and I'm going to select that plan and click Check. And the portal tells me that the blog demo resource definition has been successfully added to the plan, and it might take a little time for it to appear in the list for the end user to see. I find that this is pretty quick, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my tenant view. So I'm logged into the Windows Azure Pack portal as a demo user that I created earlier, which has access to that demo plan. I haven't created any items, but I can click New, Virtual Machine Role from Gallery, and we see that my blog demo item is present here. By clicking Next, I can provide the virtual machine role a name, and I can move to the Virtual Machine Properties section. I can choose the size of the virtual machine, the virtual hard disk. In this case, I only have one virtual hard disk that's available to me that has the matching tags that were specified as part of the creation of this item. I give an initial administrator credential, password. Remember, this credential will be used to not only install the Web Deploy framework, but also run our custom firewall configuration script. I can decide on a computer name pattern. Because this was a workgroup-based resource definition, I can either leave the default of workgroup or choose my own, and choose a network that I want this VM network or this VM role to be attached to. When I click the Next button, I go to the Application Settings section, and you'll remember that we had one parameter, which was our Web Deploy parameter. I could have given these friendly names for the end user to see by modifying the View Definition Resources file, but we took all the defaults, so we have the tool-generated values for all of these particular items. After I specify my Web Deploy parameter here, I'd simply click the checkbox, and I would have a VM role deployed and the Blog Engine application installed and configured per my requirements. Now, we're not going to go ahead and go through that deployment at this point in the demo, but I do hope that you've seen how easy it is to use the VM role authoring tool to create a Windows-based resource extension. Thank you very much.